Suppose I told you that the most ordinary thing sitting in your kitchen right now, the thing you've been reaching for every single morning since you were young, could either be quietly protecting your metabolism or silently nudging you closer to a blood sugar crisis. Not a pill, not a powder, not some wellness trend that costs a fortune and disappears in 6 months. Just coffee. Plain, everyday coffee. Here's what most people past the age of 60 haven't been told. Coffee itself was never the villain. It was never the thing working against you. What's working against you is the timing, the additions, and the sequence. And once you understand those 3 things, everything changes. The science on this is real, it's deep, and it's being published by researchers at serious institutions around the world. But almost none of it is filtering down to regular people in plain language. That's what today is about. My name is Dr. Leonard Hayes, and I've spent a significant portion of my career focused on metabolic health in older adults. What I've come to understand, and what I want to share with you today, is that coffee is one of the most misunderstood tools available to people trying to manage their blood sugar. It has the potential to work powerfully in your favor, but it also has the potential to quietly undermine everything else you're doing right. The difference between those 2 outcomes isn't willpower. It isn't discipline. It's knowledge. I'm going to walk you through the 3 coffee habits that are most commonly spiking blood sugar in people over 60 without them ever realizing it. And then I'm going to show you a practical, flexible coffee routine grounded in published research that can genuinely help your body handle glucose more effectively. Stay with me through the end, because the strategy one share about a specific timing window before meals is something that changed how I approach patient care entirely. It's that significant. But first, let's talk about what's actually happening in your body as you get older, because without that foundation, the coffee advice won't fully land. After 60, your body's ability to regulate blood sugar goes through changes that have nothing to do with willpower or diet failures. It's simply biology shifting. 2 things happen in particular. First, muscle mass begins to decline. This matters more than most people realize, because muscle tissue is one of the primary destinations for glucose in your bloodstream. When you eat carbohydrates, your body breaks them down into sugar and sends them into the blood. Muscle cells absorb that sugar and use it for energy. Fewer muscle cells means fewer places for that glucose to go, and it lingers in your blood longer than it should. Second, the insulin-producing cells in your pancreas become less responsive over time. They're slower to detect rising blood sugar, slower to send insulin out, and when the response is delayed, the glucose sits there accumulating before the correction arrives. These 2 changes together explain why the American Diabetes Association reports that adults over 65 represent the fastest-growing group of people receiving new diabetes diagnoses. Roughly 1 in 4 Americans in that age group already has some form of the condition, and an estimated half are in what's called prediabetes, elevated blood sugar that hasn't crossed the clinical threshold yet, but is clearly moving in that direction. What makes this particularly difficult is that most people have no idea it's happening. The early signs are easy to dismiss. A little more fatigue than before, extra thirst, a foggy feeling after eating. Nothing that sends you to the doctor, but something that, left unaddressed, accumulates into real damage over years. Now, here's where coffee enters the picture. When used correctly, the compounds naturally present in coffee can directly address both of those age-related changes. They can help compensate for slowing insulin response. They can help muscles take up glucose more efficiently. And they can slow the rate at which sugar from food reaches your bloodstream. But only when coffee is consumed in a way that allows those mechanisms to work. Done the wrong way, those same compounds are neutralized or overshadowed entirely. Let me introduce you to the 2 compounds doing the most important work inside every cup of coffee, because most people have never heard of them. The first is chlorogenic acid. If you think of your small intestine as a gate through which glucose enters your blood after a meal, chlorogenic acid acts like a regulator on that gate. It inhibits a specific enzyme called alpha-glucosidase, which is responsible for breaking complex carbohydrates down into simple sugars. Slow that enzyme, and you slow the flood. Instead of a sharp spike in blood sugar after eating, you get a more gradual rise, which your aging pancreas can manage far more effectively. A major review published in a peer-reviewed nutrition journal examined over 24 separate clinical trials and found that chlorogenic acid consistently reduced post-meal glucose spikes and improved insulin sensitivity, with the greatest benefit seen in older adults who already had some degree of impaired glucose regulation. The second compound is trigonelline, less famous than chlorogenic acid, but equally important. Trigonelline has been shown to act on receptors in the liver that influence how that organ handles glucose. The liver can either release stored glucose into the blood, which raises your levels, or it can absorb excess glucose and store it safely. Trigonelline helps push that decision in the right direction. A study published in a European nutrition journal found that trigonelline meaningfully improved fasting glucose in adults with metabolic syndrome, a condition that's extremely common in people over 60. There's one more thing about these compounds that matters enormously for older adults who are sensitive to caffeine or have been advised to reduce it. Decaffeinated coffee contains essentially the same amounts of chlorogenic acid and trigonelline as regular coffee. The blood sugar benefits of coffee are almost entirely driven by these non-caffeine compounds. That's not a minor footnote. That's a fundamental shift in how you should think about your options. Now let's talk about the 3 mistakes. Let me tell you about a patient I'll call Raymond, 71 years old, retired school principal, meticulous, organized, completely committed to his health. He'd read about coffee's benefits and was proud of his 3-cup daily habit. He walked every morning. He'd reduced his portion sizes, and yet his fasting blood sugar was stuck at 144, and his 3-month glucose average had climbed to a level his doctor described as concerning. When I sat down with Raymond and went through his daily routine in detail, 3 patterns jumped out immediately. The first was this. Raymond's alarm went off at 6 in the morning. By 6:15, he had a cup of coffee in his hand. Before food, before water, just coffee the very first thing. Here's what's physically happening during those early morning hours that makes this so problematic. From roughly 4 in the morning until about 8, the body goes through something called the cortisol awakening response. Your adrenal glands ramp up production of cortisol, the alertness hormone, and cortisol tells your liver to release stored glucose into the bloodstream. This is your body preparing you for the demands of the day. It happens automatically, regardless of what you eat or don't eat. Your blood sugar is already elevated when you first open your eyes. Caffeine, when consumed at that moment, directly stimulates those same adrenal glands and amplifies the cortisol response. It tells your liver to release even more glucose. Research using continuous blood glucose monitors found that drinking caffeinated coffee on an empty stomach first thing in the morning raised blood glucose by an average of nearly 30 points compared to mornings where participants skipped the early coffee. In people with insulin resistance, the spike was even more pronounced. Raymond hadn't eaten anything. His blood sugar was already elevated from the natural morning cortisol pattern. And then he amplified that response with caffeine. Every single morning. This is why so many people over 60 are confused when their fasting numbers come back high. They think it's something they ate the night before. It's not. It's what they did first thing this morning. The second mistake Raymond was making was adding sugar. 1 teaspoon per cup, which he'd been doing for 40 years without thinking about it. 1 teaspoon of table sugar is approximately 4 grams of pure, rapidly absorbed glucose. It enters your bloodstream with nothing slowing it down. No fiber, no fat, no protein, just glucose delivered directly into your system in dissolved form. And here is the painful irony of it. He was drinking coffee for its chlorogenic acid content, which works by slowing glucose absorption from carbohydrates. But chlorogenic acid slows the breakdown of complex carbohydrates. It doesn't intercept or neutralize straight glucose you've added to your cup. By adding sugar to the coffee, he was creating a glucose spike in the very drink he was consuming to prevent glucose spikes. A large analysis published in a respected clinical nutrition journal examined coffee consumption patterns across more than 200,000 adults and found that plain, unsweetened coffee was clearly associated with reduced diabetes risk. That protective effect was substantially reduced or eliminated entirely when coffee contained added sugar. Sweetened coffee, the researchers concluded, behaved metabolically far more like a sugary beverage than like the health protective drink it could have been. The third mistake was timing. Raymond had a second cup around 3 in the afternoon and occasionally a third around 7 in the evening. He insisted caffeine didn't affect his sleep anymore. He built up a tolerance over decades. I've heard this from more patients than I can count, and I have to be honest with all of them. When people say caffeine no longer disrupts their sleep, what's usually true is that they've forgotten what genuinely good sleep feels like. The disruption is still happening. They've just normalized the impaired version. Caffeine's half-life in a younger adult is somewhere between 5 and 7 hours. But liver enzymes responsible for breaking down caffeine become less efficient as we age. For many adults over 65, that half-life stretches to 8 or 9 hours. A cup of coffee at 3 in the afternoon still has a meaningful amount of caffeine in your system at midnight. Why does this matter for blood sugar? Because the most important period for metabolic restoration happens during deep sleep. This is when your body replenishes insulin sensitivity, repairs receptors on your cells, and resets the hormonal systems that regulate glucose. Research published in a leading diabetes journal found that even a single night of disrupted sleep reduced insulin sensitivity the following day by up to 25%. Poor sleep raises cortisol. Elevated cortisol raises glucose. It drives cravings for high-carbohydrate foods the next day. It reduces the energy needed to stay active. Sleep deprivation and blood sugar dysregulation reinforce each other in a cycle that quietly tightens over months and years. When I walked Raymond through all 3 of these patterns, he sat back and said, "So I've been making it worse while thinking I was doing something good?" That's exactly what was happening. And here's what we changed. We moved his first cup back by 60 to 70 minutes. In that window, he drank a glass of water and ate a small amount of protein first. 2 eggs soft-boiled. Nothing elaborate. After the protein, then the coffee, plain, with a small addition I'll explain in a moment. About 25 minutes before his lunch, he had a small second cup. Plain, no additions. We eliminated the afternoon coffee entirely and replaced it with a short walk. The evening cup was gone. 8 weeks later, Raymond's fasting glucose had dropped from 144 to 116. His 3-month average improved significantly. His doctor, who had been discussing a medication increase, said the change was, in his words, beyond what he would have predicted. Let me explain exactly why that routine works, because the reasoning matters as much as the steps. When you wake up and wait before having coffee, you allow your natural cortisol peak to rise and begin falling on its own, which happens within about 30 to 60 minutes. Eating protein before caffeine does something important. Amino acids from protein trigger the release of a hormone called GLP-1, which enhances insulin function and slows digestion. Protein also blunts the adrenal response to caffeine, reducing how much additional glucose your liver releases. And protein itself has almost no direct impact on blood sugar. So you fueled your body without creating a spike. If you can add a small amount of Ceylon cinnamon to your coffee at this stage, the research supports it meaningfully. Ceylon cinnamon, distinct from a more common cassia variety, contains compounds that partially mimic insulin activity in cells. A compiled analysis of multiple clinical trials found that daily cinnamon use reduced fasting blood glucose by an average of 10 points in people with type 2 diabetes. That's a meaningful number for a simple, inexpensive addition. The pre-meal coffee timing strategy deserves its own focus because it's the most underappreciated tool I've encountered. About 20 to 30 minutes before your largest meal of the day, drink a small, plain cup of coffee. What you're doing in that window is giving the chlorogenic acid and trigonelline time to position themselves in your intestinal lining before the food arrives. The enzyme that breaks down carbohydrates is being partially inhibited. The liver is being primed to handle incoming glucose more efficiently. When you eat your meal 20 to 30 minutes later, you're eating into an already prepared metabolic environment. Research from a Canadian university found that consuming coffee about 30 minutes before a high-carbohydrate meal significantly reduced both the height and the duration of the post-meal blood sugar response compared to drinking coffee during or after the same meal. The timing is what makes it work. Coffee with the meal or coffee after doesn't produce the same result. That pre-meal window is specific and it matters. There's one more strategy worth knowing, particularly for those who move their bodies regularly, even modestly. After any form of physical activity, whether a 20-minute walk, light stretching, or gentle resistance work, your muscle cells open up what are called GLUT4 transporters. These are channels in the cell membrane that allow glucose to enter the muscle directly without requiring insulin. It's one of the most powerful natural glucose-clearing mechanisms the body has. Research found that drinking plain caffeinated coffee within about 30 minutes after exercise extended this window of enhanced glucose absorption, effectively keeping those muscle channels open longer. For seniors who walk in the morning or afternoon, having a post-exercise coffee is a simple way to amplify the benefit of movement. Let me tell you briefly about another patient, a 67-year-old retired teacher named Patricia. She came to me not because she'd been diagnosed, but because she'd watched a family member navigate diabetes for years, and she was determined to stay off that path. Her fasting glucose was 121. Her 3-month average put her firmly in the pre-diabetes range. Her routine included sweetened instant coffee first thing in the morning before eating, a large bowl of oatmeal with honey an hour later, afternoon coffee with a biscuit, and sugary tea in the evening. No medication, no dramatic health problems, just a slow, quiet drift in the wrong direction. We made 5 changes. She switched from instant sweetened coffee to fresh ground, plain. She moved her morning coffee back by 60 minutes, eaten after a boiled egg. We introduced a small pre-lunch coffee 25 minutes before eating. The afternoon coffee was replaced with a 20-minute walk. Evening tea was kept, but the sugar was removed. 12 weeks later, her fasting glucose was 96. Her 3-month average had dropped to normal range. She told me the mental clarity she felt was something she hadn't experienced in years. The fatigue she'd chalked up to age had eased noticeably. Sleep was deeper. She felt, in her words, like herself again. Patricia didn't change her medication because she wasn't on any. She changed the timing, the contents, and the sequence of something she was already doing every single day. A few things worth noting for people with specific circumstances. If you experience heart palpitations, anxiety, or sleep disruption from caffeine, you may process it more slowly than average due to a genetic variation in how your liver metabolizes it. For slow metabolizers, limiting to 1 cup of regular coffee per day or switching to high-quality decaf is the right move. Decaf retains the chlorogenic acid and trigonelline, so the blood sugar benefits remain. If acid reflux or stomach sensitivity is a factor, drink your coffee after food rather than before. The pre-meal window can be adapted to drinking coffee with the meal rather than before it. If you're on diabetes medication, please bring this information to your doctor as a starting point for conversation, not as a reason to adjust anything on your own. The coffee you already drink every morning is either working for you or against you. The difference isn't the coffee. It's the when, the what's in it, and the sequence. No supplements required. No special purchases. No dramatic overhaul. Just a smarter relationship with something you're already doing.